Okay. So hi, my name is Alana Feaster. Just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us tonight for our Environmental Action Summit, Saving Boston's Tree Canopy and the Benefits of Natural Grass. We are in the midst of a climate crisis. Temperatures are steadily increasing and storm events are becoming more extreme. Our communities are not prepared, and we are not prepared because we are dealing with the detrimental impacts of environmental inequities and continued disinvestment in natural resources in our community. We deserve better. Now is the time to focus on developing climate resiliency and sustainability to combat the impacts of climate change. And one of the major ways that is accomplished is through protecting and increasing tree canopy in urban wilds, not destroying them. Communities with access to tree canopy benefit from lower temperatures, reducing the heat island effect. The trees absorb stormwater, preventing flooding, and they clean our air by removing carbon. We know all the benefits trees provide, yet we are seeing development projects that have done so or propose to clear-cut many acres of mature trees. We see this all too often in environmental justice neighborhoods where the value of trees are minimized. Development projects have to be viewed through an environmental lens to ensure that what is being proposed is a true gain for any community. The community must be involved in the process and have a seat at the table. And we don't just want a seat at the table, but we demand to be heard and listened to as well. Right now, that is not happening. Development and green space can coexist, and we need to work together to dispel the myth that it's an either-or choice. These are not competing interests. The mindset of developers, city and state permitting authorities, and our elected officials needs to shift to prioritizing our green space like it does development. This is a matter of public health. Tonight, we will discuss a few projects in the city of Boston that are under threat of development that we're hoping to preserve or restore. We will hear from Friends of Malia Cass Boulevard about the importance of coalition building and grassroots advocacy. We will also hear about the dangers of PFAS and artificial turf, because unfortunately, there are projects still being proposed that will destroy much needed green space for the installation of a plastic carpet that is extremely dangerous. And we also want to hear from you who are participating with us tonight about sites that you're advocating for as well. And again, thank you for joining us. So we have a lot that we're going to go through tonight. We want to leave a lot of great time for good discussion, which we'll have open up during the Q&A. We will be limiting our site presentations, but you can put your questions in the chat while the presenters are speaking. And if you have a question in the chat, just please indicate who that question is for. And let's get started. So for our agenda, we'll first be talking about tree canopy that's under threat. I will be speaking about Morton Street. Kay Matthew will be talking about the fight to save Malcolm X Park. Lisa Beatman will be talking about Crane Ledge Woods. Stella Road, presented by Nancy Aleo. Dale Street by Pat Alvarez, and a few other of the neighbors who are fighting there. Joanna Hines talking about Boston Housing Authority sites, and Sarah Freeman and Joanne will be speaking about Franklin Park. We will also hear from Dr. Kyla Bennett and Dr. Sarah Evans about the dangers of artificial turf and PFAS. Next slide, please. Some of our sponsors for the event that we're putting on for you tonight: Morton Street Tree Coalition, Friends of Malia Cass Boulevard, Speak for the Trees, Crane Ledge Woods Coalition, Community Stewards and Friends of Malcolm X Park, Dale Street Neighbors, many residents and friends citywide. Next slide, please. This is just a Boston area focus on a map of the sites that we'll be talking about tonight. You can go to the next slide. Here's just with a legend, so you can see all the different sites are listed, and here they are on the map. And these are additional sites that Boston Tree Canopy that's not protected, that will also be spoken about later on in the presentations as well. And we will put the slides in the chat for you all to download. So that will be something you will see later on tonight as well. We'll get those slides out to you. Next slide. So now we'll hear from Kay Matthew, one of the founders of Friends of Malia Cass Boulevard, about their grassroots advocacy and their great fight to save 400 trees along Malia Cass Boulevard. Kay?
Hey Thank you, Ilana, and thank you for your inspiring and very true words. Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's really great that tonight has arrived, and we thought we'd start with a success story. As Ilana said, I'm Kay Matthew. I'm a member of the Friends of Melnia Cass Boulevard, a grassroots community group of Lower Roxbury neighbors and their allies who took on City Hall and won an environmental justice victory in Lower Roxbury for more than 400 mature trees that line Melnia Cass in a 1-mile stretch from Albany Street to Ruggles Station. And this first picture on the left is quite a powerful, dramatic overhead aerial indicating in red the trees that were planned by the city to be removed for a reconstruction project. That hasn't happened. Melnia Cass Boulevard is one legacy of the 1960s urban renewal policies that removed entire neighborhoods, uprooting families and communities in order to make room for such projects as the Inner Belt and the Southwest Corridor. But the People Before Highways movement prevailed, and this was 50 years ago. Over the past 12 years, the Friends of Melnia Cass Boulevard faced an effort to widen Melnia Cass in a redesign project that would include bus rapid transit lanes, and in so doing, remove 400 mature trees. In the face of millions of construction dollars, we see over and over again that concerns for climate change and quality of life often play a very secondary role. But when people come together with common cause, they can win. Through public meetings, public actions, standouts, street theater, and connection with like-minded elected officials, we were able to get plans to widen the boulevard withdrawn. This rescued perhaps as many as 200 trees, but the plans for redesign went forward with little hope for the remaining unprotected trees. We continued our work, making the issue public and pushing back on the city plans. At one point, we had a tree wrapping day where all the trees to be removed, a gigantic swath, as you can see, were wrapped with white cloth so that neighbors and vehicles and the public could see the enormous impact of the proposed tree removal. The Friends of Melnia Cass Boulevard continued meeting, continued submitting letters, continued calling out the city for their ill-conceived decisions, including the choice of a very highway-oriented design team. In 2020, more people stepped forward, and with the support of a broad swath of citizens, even doctors, lawyers, elected officials, sister community organizations, and of course the neighbors, the stalwart neighbors, we put forward a powerful public presence throughout all of 2020. And at the end of the year, in December 2020, the project was halted. We had won. We had saved a mile-long tree canopy in a low-income neighborhood, an enormous victory for environmental justice. To quote a longstanding Boston community organizer, Lou Finfer, who just yesterday was writing about the People Before Highways movement, he says, it takes organization and strategy to get leaders to listen to community concerns. To my mind, this means coalition building. Despite differences in approach or tactics, we must come together. Lou goes on, thank you, Parker. Lou goes on to say, for significant social change to take place, people need to relentlessly and strategically organize so that they can engage government officials and business leaders, in our case, developers, to listen and act. I'm looking forward to tonight. It can be a fabulous building block, the summit of a strong environmental justice movement. Thanks, Ilana.
You're welcome, Kay. Thank you so much. It's so inspiring, great work that you guys have done. And yes, so in the spirit of coalition building, we want to hopefully see this at the end of this summit. So next slide, please, Frank. And the next one. So now, we just heard Kay speak about that wonderful victory. I'm going to talk to you all tonight about Morton Street tree canopy. So this is a picture of the Morton Street tree canopy located at 550 Morton Street in Dorchester on the old Boston State Hospital grounds. Please take note of the homes that directly abut this property. This is a 4-acre parcel of land that we're going to be talking about tonight. Next slide, please. This is the street view of the same canopy, very beautiful, lush, one of the few natural assets that we have left. Next slide. Another view of the canopy, just want people to take it in and just see how beautiful it is. Next slide, please, Frank. And this is also Morton Street. So we go from seeing all of the beautiful canopy that we just saw. This is also on Morton Street when you cross over Harvard, where we have very little trees, very few trees. It just shows that the stark difference in the canopy with it not being there. It looks lifeless, it looks barren, and the project that we're going to be talking about tonight would create a continuation of this. Next slide, please. So what we're talking about, 4 acres of the beautiful mature tree canopy that was just shown. A developer wants to destroy 4 acres to install an artificial turf field. This proposal will create an enormous heat island in an environmental justice community, equivalent in size to 4 football fields. There's language in this proposal that it's in perpetuity, meaning that once this destruction is done in our community, we will not be able to undo the tree loss and the destruction that will be caused. We have opposition letters from the community related to this project. We have a petition that's growing daily. I will put that link in the chat. Hopefully people will sign. We have science about the dangers of turf and the importance of having tree cover and the lack of tree cover that we have, especially in environmental justice communities. And still, a developer is pushing this project forward. And they want to coin this a community benefit, but what we're saying is if the community was not involved in the process, you cannot say that what you're proposing for the community is a benefit when it only benefits a small portion of the community. And we weren't at the table. And the real benefit is that the entire canopy that's cleaning our air, absorbing our stormwater, and decreasing our temperatures. So with the artificial turf, another issue with this project is you'll be exposing the community to harmful particulate matter, forever chemicals that are found in artificial turf that can lead to testicular cancer, kidney cancer, liver damage, exacerbate asthma, and other respiratory illnesses. Next slide, please. So we've asked for impact studies related to this project, and we haven't received them. Environmental impact studies, crime impact studies. When you're talking about a footprint of that size in a residential and a densely populated residential area, there are going to be issues. We've asked for a traffic impact study. They're talking about bus cutouts to drop off players on these fields and everything else like that. So what does that mean for the traffic pattern along Morton Street? No thoughtful analysis. We're talking about a pollution, to understand the levels of pollution that would be increased just within this small area alone. We have a biolab, we have a crematorium with plumes of smoke billowing in the air all the time. We have the exhaust from the cars along Morton Street. We have the field that this school wants to install, a 4-acre field here. They just put a turf field behind their school. So that particulate matter is in our air. So you're talking about levels of pollution that are already within our air. And now a project to add 4 acres worth of additional pollution and toxicity. We haven't even talked about the contamination to the Canterbury Brook, the displacing and poisoning of wildlife, and the flooding that could potentially happen along Morton Street and the homes that directly abut this property. So there are many issues with this project. And what we're saying is that these conversations about development should not be developer driven. If the community are the ones who deal with the impacts, and the communities have to have a seat at the table. Next slide, please. And here we just wanted to illustrate for you the canopy loss. So the overall goal for our area is 40%. We are already operating or have less than that at a deficit of 21%. With this project, we would be losing 33% of any tree canopy goal, which shows that we'd be creating a huge heat island And what we're saying is that if, the city and state have these goals and actions with the urban forest plan, increasing tree equity, the Green New Deal, we want to make sure that the actions align with the goals that are set forth at the city and state level. Thank you. So now we'll hear from Kay again to talk to us about Malcolm X Park.
Alana, I'm going to pass to Derek Evans, who is a leader in opposition to what's going on in Malcolm X Park.
All right, Derek, you are up.
Oh, wow. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this very important and timely conversation. I think most people know that Malcolm X Park is an approximately 15-acre area of great ecological and cultural significance to the history of Roxbury, not just in this last century, but all the way to the 1600s. It is considered by many people to have been regarded as a sacred place, located as it is very close to the camping grounds of the original so-called praying Indians who would often come to Roxbury proper to visit the Reverend John Eliot, whose 30-acre pasture was just east of current-day Malcolm X Park, and particularly the most historic part of the park, which is known as Honeysuckle Hill. This project is such, unfortunately, a typical example of just municipal, no one in charge, really, except for sort of the entrenched bureaucratic mechanisms, right, that envision and then accomplished so-called municipal improvements, including, unfortunately, and maybe particularly unfortunately, on city property that are known to be parks. This started off as a $500,000 project to restore mostly concrete, heavily used, newer and non-historic portions of the park adjacent to Martin Luther King Boulevard. And it morphed over time like a fast-growing anaconda into this thing that encompassed the entirety of the park, and in reverse order. In other words, the more environmentally vulnerable, sensitive, important, and frankly, again, historic areas of the park became part of the project last. It was not originally part of the project. And the bigger the project got, and the more quickly it very sloppily morphed into this big thing that, frankly, the starving African-American EJ community, for the most part, initially welcomed. More dollars would mean more improvement, more impact in a traditionally neglected municipal neighborhood. And the city, this spanned 3 mayors. None of them, the administrations, were really kind of ever ahead of this thing. The community, much less. There were months and months of years of community and so-called community engagement. And a lot of community engagement went in, but this process, nevertheless. So I guess I'm going to run out of time, I'm sure. So I'll just say this became a $9 million project. It's ridiculous. It still is. I mean, to look at the uncovered piles of dirt. I mean, it looks like the western part of the park looks like an Amazon mining operation. And Honeysuckle Hill, which has been carved into for paths that are likely going to kill trees, as far as the impact on the roofs, it's not going to be ADA compliant still, which was the last minute rationale for regrading the hill. And I'll just end by saying we learned here everything sort of reactively, ad hoc, piecemeal. In the future, I'm afraid that this park is a template for, I think, on city property, in particular parks, that ADA is going to be used against people with disability and others, frankly, because of the narrow interpretation of that law and its impact on particularly sloped canopy. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you for that. So next we'll hear from Lisa Beatman, Crane Ledge Woods.
Hi, everybody. So glad to see you all. So glad to be working with other people who care so much about the environment. I'm here representing the Crane Ledge Woods Coalition, which is comprised of several neighborhood associations in the neighborhood surrounding Hyde Park, surrounding Crane Ledge Woods. I'm sorry, but my notes were they were buffering, but now they're back. Okay, so as you can see in the slide, Crane Ledge Woods is a 24-acre woodland, beautiful, steep, rocky woodland, right at the nexus of these three neighborhoods, Hyde Park, Roslindale, and Mattapan. These are environmental justice sections of these three neighborhoods. And this particular area where I live has little to no walking distance access to city parks. And the city prides itself on everybody having access, walking distance access, but it's not true yet. We're working on it. Let's see. Okay, the next slide are details. Again, I'm just going to read from my notes. Our coalition has been working for about 2 years now, and we have had several wins so far. We have had a true, inclusive, and transparent community process. There is community consensus citywide that these 24 acres ought to be preserved for conservation, for environmental and public health benefits, to prevent heat island and stormwater flooding, and more. There have been over 5,000 signatures on our petition, and there are 57 organizations citywide, all supporting full conservation.
2 minutes.
Massachusetts Audubon and Boston Building Trades Council are in support. Audubon is committed to sharing expertise and marshaling resources. There were over 4,000 letters sent to the city against the project and in favor of full conservation. All the advocacy was able to achieve full
30
project
seconds,
scope
please.
and not a fast track. The Boston Civic Design Commission said they would not consider the current developer's proposal, the design as proposed. For now, the development seems to be stalled. The coalition met with Arthur Jemison from the BPDA, the new head, and then last, there is funding available in the city budget over some line items, including land acquisition and climate resilience, but there needs to be political will to allocate it. There's also likely state and federal and private resources that the city could tap. So we still need to convince the officials to get on board, and stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So now we'll hear from Nancy Aleo presenting on Stella Road.
Hi, Alana. Thank you for that. Stella Road, the Stella Road parcel is located in Roslindale between Mount Hope Street and Stella Road, and sits behind the single-family homes along American Legion Highway. It's just a few minutes down the road from Crane's Ledge Woods on one side and the Morton Street parcel on the other end of American Legion Highway. Stella Road is the lowest point in the Blue Hills Reservation and is prone to considerable flooding for many decades. Stella Road is an urban wild without city designation as such. Neighbors have fought off development of this parcel for over 30 years. Next slide, please. Stella Road is a privately owned parcel owned by Shanti Development Company. The natural land totals 0.62 acres with significant tree canopy. Stella Road is in the Stony Brook floodplain, and it is in an environmental justice neighborhood. City records list this parcel as unusable. The main issues are there is community consensus for full conservation. There is a willing seller, but he has development plans. The city has no agreed criteria for new urban wild acquisitions. And the city has concerns in terms of maintenance and personnel regarding adding new urban wilds. Next slide. Here's the graphic that you've already seen a few times, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So now we'll hear about Dale Street, presented by Pat, Kim, and Barbara. Beth, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll just say a word about Sharon Woods, and then Beth and Kim will talk about their 20-year fight to save this Dale Street woodland. Sharon Woods is a 25-acre site that the city purchased many years ago. It was a dumping site for a construction company. The city spent over $600,000, well more than that, cleaning this up. My organization runs a youth jobs program, and our youth have been working for the last 14 years to keep the woods healthy, building trails, doing new plantings. This piece that you see outlined in red is a critical missing piece of the woods. And I'm going to pass it over to Beth and Kim to talk about why development would be disastrous for the entire Sharon Woods and the entire neighborhood.
So Kim and I in the neighborhood, or the neighbors, have been fighting this battle for actually over 30 years, Pat. And as you can see, it's a narrow 1.1 acre parcel of land. And the city actually committed to purchasing the land and gave us $350,000. The new owner that's taken over, because the old owner had passed away recently this year, and his son has taken it over, now has a purchase and sales agreement on the land with a developer. So developing the land would be disastrous for our neighborhood because it would have inland flooding. There's natural springs under there, and it's a capped off river under there. And we would have a real problem if that was all opened up again. And Kim, do you want to talk a little bit about your thing that with the mayor? Because you don't have too much time.
Okay, we had 4 mayors commit to this.
Right.
In 2007, we had an iPod done. And they stated that this land should be purchased by the city or the state to combine it with Sharon Woods. And it indicates that if it's developed, there should only be three houses on it. Even with the 3 houses, it would devastate the urban wilds that we do have, Sharon Woods.
30 seconds, please.
This developer is talking about putting anywhere from 20 plus townhouses in there. It would devastate because it abuts urban wild Sharon Woods. It would cause flooding. It would destroy the trees that are in there. The underground springs will be rerouted.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pat, Beth, and Kim for that. Next slide, please. So Johanna is going to speak about the Boston Housing Authority properties that are trees that are under threat.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joanna Hines, and I am a Charlestown resident. I'm here to tell you a little bit about the hundreds of mature trees slated for destruction across the Bunker Hill housing development. The BHA manages this 27-acre parcel, but the land is actually owned by the city of Boston. A little background on Charlestown, it's actually a tree desert with one of the lowest tree canopies in Boston at 11%. The loss of nearly 300 mature trees from this property would account for approximately 10% of Charlestown's entire canopy, and their removal would devastate this neighborhood's urban forests for generations to come. The developers and so this property is currently under redevelopment or is in the process of redevelopment. And the developer's remedy is to eventually replace these large trees with saplings, which will take decades to grow, assuming they survive, which sadly is doubtful. Without question, every Bostonian, every person deserves a good home. The BHA's failure to ensure safe and sanitary living conditions for existing tenants in the Bunker Hill project is unfortunate, and there is an immediate need for new, deeply affordable homes. However, the removal of this urban forest will lead to higher rates of asthma, increased temperature, air pollution, increased flooding, and will create environmentally unlivable conditions for all local residents. The 340 trees that comprise this urban forest are an asset that serve all of us, not just Charlestown. And many of these trees are between 60 and 80 years old. They'll never be replaced in our lifetime. The failure to protect them comes at a great cost. And so this picture that you see represents 1/3 of the trees slated for removal. Of the trees that are on the existing site, there are 23 species, and the vast majority, according to one of the best arborists that I've ever met, Norm Healy, are healthy, mature, and big. Over half of these trees are classified as 15 dBH or larger.
Wow.
And there are a ton of natural habitats, birds, squirrels. I've even seen an eagle. It's not too late to push the city to do better. Better plans would protect these trees. These buildings could be retrofitted, and in many places, such buildings are. They were made with the finest brick and steel that America ever produced.
30 seconds, please.
And so while this parcel that you see in the picture, this first phase has technically been approved, it hasn't begun. And there is a growing movement amongst the residents that live there and the residents that surround the development to save these trees. And I hope we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Joanna. Thank you. So now we're going to hear, next slide, please, from Joanne and Sarah about restoring 13 acres of Franklin Park back to Greenland.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here and everyone participating. We started out, those of you who were here at the beginning heard the success story of Melnia Cass Boulevard. We're kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, where if you look at the left, lower left, the Shattuck Hospital site is 13 acres in Franklin Park, where you can see practically every tree has already been removed, but we're looking at a possible opportunity to restore. So the picture upper left shows in context what the rest of the park around it looks like and what a heat island it is. On the right, the picture shows that within the park, over 200 acres that are shown in black are not really freely open and accessible to the public between White Stadium and this controlled by the school department, the zoo that is lovely, but you have to pay for it. Likewise, the golf course, you can't just use it like a park. There's a maintenance yard and the Shattuck Hospital. Next slide, please. So it was a park for over 50 years, those 13 acres. The hospital got built and it did serve important uses for 70 years or so, but now it's slated for demolition. And it's a heat island where there had been a forested meadow. I don't know if any of you have ever been just to the right as you face it from Morton Street. Rock Milton is one of the most beautiful areas of the park, and it's hidden. There isn't even sidewalk. Whoops. And it'll continue to be hidden if the development takes place. The Commonwealth is seeking a development partner for a 99-year lease. They got one response that is for many times larger than what had been discussed during the planning. Temporary cottages had been built for the low threshold housing. Drug use, whether it's connected or not, we don't know, but drug use has increased around the park. Franklin Park Coalition held a safety meeting, and it became apparent that neighbors were not really aware of the plans and were not very supportive of the way it's going. So rather than the redevelopment, tree canopy, could address these disparities. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Next slide, please. So Frank is going to talk to us a bit about other tree canopy in Boston that's not protected. So Frank, can you go through these different sites, please?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, good evening, everybody. Frank O'Brien with Allendale Coalition. I'm not going to take a lot of time. I'll just run through these real quickly. A couple of points at the beginning, right? So we've focused, as Alana said at the outset, just on this part of Southwest Boston that we're all most familiar with, but there's other sites citywide. Every neighborhood has their own places that they really care for. And this is not to say this is just the only place where this is important. We know like Chinatown has serious heat island and related East Boston. So with that said, I'm going to run through a couple of sites that illustrate some of the patterns that we're seeing in each of these locations. Like you all have talked about, we could spend a lot of time just digging into the details and the history. So this first site is so-called Canterbury 1. It's right next to the Morton Street site that Alana was talking about. This is actually a protected, designated site on the map, but it is hedged in by the other development, as you see. And it's also where the Canterbury Brook starts. And it illustrates that these maps, they're not always clear. You know, you look at a map and it says, oh, it's protected. But then once you understand the underlying land use and other designations, it turns out not necessarily to be so. And also it shows that these are connected ecosystems, right? They're not just sort of parcels in isolation. This is the so-called Preventorium. It's out on Commons Highway and Harvard Street. That's Harvard Street to the left, and then Stonecrest is the street on the top. This is an interesting site because it has wetlands. You obviously can't see it because of the tree canopy, but it's also ecologically connected to Mattahunt Woods, which will be next. The thing about this site is that it's developable, but the enforcement of the wetlands regulations would really limit development. And so far, a church owns it, and the church has not been able to figure out how to develop it effectively.
2 minutes.
Obviously, developers want to do more than just that. So this illustrates the relationship between regulation and ecosystem connectivity. Now, these are the Mattahunt Woods, and what we're looking at here is how oftentimes these sites are patchworked, right? So the land that's in green is protected nominally, right? But the parcels that are in blue, they're actually in the housing department. And right now the city is going through a process of trying to either integrate these into the urban wild or sell them for housing. So this illustrates another trend that we see. And then this is a small site along the Canterbury Brook, which again, city owned. And the last point I'll make is that we haven't talked at all about trees on private property. And I know Speak for the Trees and David have been understanding that issue. And we'll talk hopefully a little bit more about that in the Q&A. And here's just another BPDA site that's it's in the same Stony Brook right away as Stella and Dale Street.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Frank. And this here, we will put the slides in the chat, just some, excuse me, city programs that can help folks with their advocacy for green space. So we're just trying to put within our PowerPoint information and tools for participants to use down the road. Next slide, please. So now we're going into we've had our tree canopy. I mean, we could have gone on for, as you can see, we try to keep it timed forever and ever with, unfortunately, all of the issues that we're talking about with tree canopy. But in some of the instances too, we're talking about the removal of tree canopy for installation of toxic artificial turf fields. And so we have Dr. Kyla Bennett, Pierce Director of Science Policy, and Dr. Sarah Evans, Assistant Professor, Environmental Medicine and Public Health with Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, to talk to us about the dangers of artificial turf, because we really want for our community to understand what the dangers are, what we're being exposed to, what our children are being exposed to. So we just thought that it was very important for that to be a part of tonight's discussion. So Dr. Bennett.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen. There we go, and play from start. Here we go. Okay, so I just want to talk to you briefly tonight about the myths of artificial turf, because developers will not be honest with you. Let's start by saying what is artificial turf, because a lot of people don't know. It's basically a 4-part system where you've got oftentimes a shock pad to make it softer, because artificial turf can be quite hard. Then there's a backing into which there are these fake green blades of grass that are woven, and then an infill, which is often crumb rubber. It used to be, but now these days developers are starting to put in what they call more natural infill, and that keeps the grass blades, the fake grass blades, upright. So artificial turf is bad for the environment. For decades, environmentalists were focused on the crumb rubber infill. We realized that it was very, very bad. It's dangerous. There were a lot of people saying that they were causing cancer. There are heavy metals, VOCs, all sorts of carcinogens in there. Hopefully, whichever artificial turf is being proposed for your site does not have crumb rubber. We also know now that crumb rubber kills fish. There are 2 very recent papers which show how awful this stuff is for fish. And if it's killing fish, it's probably killing other animals and also harmful for humans. But here's the problem. Industry is now moving away from crumb rubber, and they think that that's going to solve the problem and make artificial turf okay. That is not the case. They are starting to move toward what they call organic infills. And when they say organic, they don't mean organic like you go to the grocery store and buy organic fruits and vegetables. They mean organic, meaning it once came from a living material. So they're talking about walnut shells, coconut shells, engineered wood. Sometimes they're using things like ground up sneakers or sand or cork, but this does not solve the problem. You could put organic tapioca as infill, and you're still going to have a huge problem because the turf itself contains toxic chemicals. So in 2019, I was the one who discovered that artificial turf contains per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, otherwise known as PFAS. You've probably read about these. That's a class of thousands and thousands of chemicals. They're nicknamed forever chemicals, and they're all very persistent because they have a strong carbon-fluorine bond that's almost impossible to break. Many of these PFAS will bioaccumulate in your body, and all that we have studied are toxic. In June of 2022, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued an interim health advisory for just 2 of these PFAS, PFOA and PFOS, and they said there's virtually no safe level of this stuff in your drinking water. By the end of this calendar year, in about 2 weeks, they're supposed to be coming out with actual levels, regulatory limits for these 2 chemicals in our drinking water. I don't know if they're going to make their own self-imposed deadline, but hopefully they will. There are 3 routes of exposure for PFAS. You can inhale it, you can absorb it through your skin, and you can ingest it through food and drink. We know now that PFAS leaches off of artificial turf fields into the water. Dr. Graham Peasley of Notre Dame University has tested dozens of samples of artificial turf, and he has found PFAS in every single one. We have not yet found a brand of artificial turf that does not contain PFAS. So I, without a doubt, know that whatever developer wants to put artificial turf in your area, they are going to say ours is PFAS free. It is not true. Do not believe them. They cannot make it without PFAS. Real world examples show us that water around artificial turf quickly becomes contaminated, so does the soil. And in Martha's Vineyard, a study showed that 12 parts per trillion of 6 PFAS, those are the 6 that Massachusetts regulates, leach off a new field. And this gets higher and higher as the field ages. Dr. Sarah Evans, who's speaking after me, will tell you about the health impacts associated with PFAS, but they're awful. And as Alana said earlier, they do cause cancer. Artificial turf also sheds microplastics, another problem that we're reading a lot about in the papers these days, up to 480 pounds per year. That fake grass will break off and it will shed into your soil, it'll blow around, and each little piece of those microplastics contains toxic chemicals. Artificial turf also contributes to climate change. As you all know, natural grass will absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen, and artificial turf does exactly the opposite. It releases carbon dioxide, methane, and other chemicals. In fact, the manufacturing, installation, service, and disposal of just a 2-acre artificial turf field is responsible for the generation of 55.6 tons of carbon dioxide. And as someone else pointed out, they get very, very hot. They can get up to 180, sometimes even 200 degrees. It's dangerous for the people who play on them, and it contributes to heat islands. Industry is going to say to you, real grass requires pesticides. They don't. Real grass requires too much water. Not necessarily. In fact, artificial turf does require to be watered. They'll tell you that real grass doesn't give you enough playtime. A well-built real grass field will give you enough playtime. They'll say real grass is too expensive. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. Artificial turf is much more expensive. And if you look at Turi's website, the Toxic Use Reduction Institute in Lowell, they have a nice web page about the costs of artificial turf versus grass. They'll also tell you that artificial turf is green because it can be recycled. It cannot. It's a myth. It cannot be recycled. So none of this is true. Don't buy it. Bottom line, artificial turf is bad for the environment. There's no benefit. The environmental damage will be felt for decades to come. And even though drought and climate change is an issue, even here in Massachusetts, artificial turf is not the answer. It cannot handle extreme precipitation well. And as you all know, when you cut down trees, you're going to get a loss of evapotranspiration and get additional flooding. Industry will tell you artificial turf is the gold standard. It is not. Some industry reps do not even know that there's PFAS in their products. The ones that do know will often tell you that there isn't. It's bad economically. It's more expensive to maintain properly. It does need watering. It needs to be replaced every 7 to 10 years, and infill needs to be replaced every year. And the potential liability issues are huge. With EPA about to come out with these regulatory limits, and with the state tightening their regulatory limits, every artificial turf field is going to be contaminating the soil underneath the field and the water, which means it's going to be harmful if you try to garden near one of these things. The PFAS can be inhaled, it can be dermally absorbed, and it can get into our water supply. The liability issues, as I said, are very, very high. Class action suits are happening all the time for contaminated water. My town, I live in Easton, Massachusetts, and we are part of a class action suit because our water is so contaminated. We had to build a $9 million filtration plant that the taxpayers had to pay for just so we can drink our water and take showers in it. You should demand that they prove that the materials are PFAS free. They will not be able to do it. It will be one way for you to try to get around this issue of putting in artificial turf because it's just a bad idea. So here's a picture of artificial turf fields that has been destroyed by a strong rainstorm. This happens all the time. They are not good under extreme weather, extreme heat, extreme precipitation, all the things that climate change is bringing us. And I strongly urge you to fight the placement of artificial turf as much as you can. Happy to help you as you engage in that fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bennett. That was amazing. And yes, and like you said, the fight, especially for Morton Street and other sites, it will definitely continue because our community should not be created and made to be cancer alleys and Superfund sites because of the installation of all this toxic stuff, toxic turf, when we have the science to support that. Excellent. Dr. Evans, I believe we'll hear from Dr. Evans now too on PFAS as well. I believe I was able to make you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen. Oh, yes, okay. So now we'll hear from Dr. Evans.
Does that show the presentation screen or the note screen? Does it look?
It's blue. It says artificial turf and children's health. So it's the beginning of your PowerPoint.
Okay,
Yeah.
it looks correct, right?
Yes, it looks correct.
Okay, so thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Dr. Bennett, for that introduction to concerns that we have about artificial turf. I'm going to build on what Dr. Bennett spoke about related to artificial turf to talk about the health impacts, not only due to chemical exposures, but also due to heat exposures. And if she did not convince you that replacing beautiful tree canopy with an artificial turf surface is the worst possible choice, hopefully you will come away from my presentation with that recognition as well. So I work with a team of researchers and clinicians at Mount Sinai in New York City who study the impacts of early life exposures on health outcomes. And part of what we do is to translate the science that's coming out of our centers to help promote safer practices and policies. So before I start zeroing in specifically on turf, I kind of wanted to give you an introduction to the way that we think about how environment impacts health. So we're focusing on artificial turf, but when we study environmental exposures, we really think about what we call the exposome, which is everything that we're exposed to, all of the external factors as well as internal factors and how they interact. And I mention this now because I'm going to talk about chemicals and heat exposures, but we really think about the full neighborhood. And I think that's what you all are thinking about when you look at the consequences of what would happen with eliminating tree canopy and green spaces in your communities. We need to look at individual risk factors. We need to look at the existing pollutants and the chemicals, as well as that neighborhood environment that is provided to Boston residents. If we think just about the chemicals that come from all the pollutants that we're exposed to, we know from studies that the CDC does that over 200 chemicals are found in the bodies of nearly all Americans. And those are just the ones that we know how to test for. So there are likely many, many more. Many of those are found in artificial turf. Many of them are those PFAS chemicals, which is a family of over 5,000 chemicals probably at this point that Dr. Bennett talked about. And what's really concerning is that many of those exposures are shown to be higher in children, and they're higher in the Black and Hispanic participants in these studies. And when we think about chemical exposures from artificial turf, or really any consumer product that typically the EPA approves for use by the general population, they're typically not thinking about these long-term and low-dose and cumulative exposures, or all of the other things that people experience across their lifespan that impact health. And so it's not surprising that children experience some of these highest exposures just based on their normal behavior and also their physiology. So they're closer to the ground where chemicals tend to settle in the dust and soil. They roll around, they put their hands in their mouths and other objects in their mouths. But they're also more susceptible to things like heat exposure because they're less able to regulate body temperature, and they breathe faster than adults do. So they're at higher risk for inhalational exposures. And so when we're thinking broadly about who's most vulnerable to impacts from environmental exposures, we think a lot about when someone is exposed. So like I said, during childhood, also during pregnancy, these are times where systems are developing and make individuals more vulnerable to those exposures. But we also think about who's being exposed and what the totality of all those exposures are. And so I just wanted to point out here, many of you have talked about environmental justice tonight, that we know that environmental racism contributes to health inequities that we see in this country because of institutionalized policies and practices. Things like siting of hazardous waste facilities and other point sources of pollution, near communities of color, and things that you've all also touched on tonight. The fact that urban low income and communities of color lack urban tree canopy, access to green spaces, and are more likely to have heat islands. And I'm going to talk a little bit about heat islands in the context of turf as well. And so all of these multiple exposures, which include the chemical environment, the social environment, and the built environment, contribute to poor health outcomes like we see for asthma with higher rates in children of color. So Kyla already mentioned a bit about artificial turf, and I think it's important to also point out that the federal government recognizes that we don't know enough about artificial turf to prove the safety of its use. And they stated that there are limitations in the studies that have happened to date. And so they embarked several years ago now with the CDC and the Consumer Product Safety Commission on a study to just look at that recycled tire crumb rubber that Dr. Bennett mentioned. And they identified, as others have, 350 chemicals. They admitted that there were very few studies that had been done to really analyze the impacts on health of artificial turf. And they found that there were very little studies done on the other components of turf, like the grass blades and the matting and alternatives to the crumb rubber. So industry often, insists that these products are safe, but even the federal study has not been able to show that yet. And so this is just a list of some of those chemicals that have been found in turf. And again, just like PFAS, we see that many of these chemicals can be inhaled. They can get into the body not only through skin absorption, but also through open wounds, which are more common on artificial turf. And children can accidentally ingest those particles. So this is only a very small portion of the upwards of 350 chemicals that have been identified in artificial turf. So just to show you some of the health impacts that have been associated with the PFAS chemicals that Dr. Bennett spoke about, they've been associated with high cholesterol, thyroid disease, GI problems, kidney and testicular cancers, and interestingly, more recently, an increase in COVID-19 severity. And again, to just sort of talk about that overlay between all of the factors that we're talking about, we saw, increased COVID-19 severity in environmental justice communities, in areas that have high levels of pollution, and in individuals who have higher exposure to PFAS. Decreased vaccine response, again, tying into things that are really impacting communities now in terms of infectious disease. So most health outcomes that you can think of are impacted by PFAS exposures. And again, the federal government now is trying to dramatically reduce what they previously had said was a safe level of PFAS in drinking water. Another emerging concern that we have around artificial turf, both for environmental contamination and health impacts, is that these are big plastic mats, big plastic fields that shed microplastics. Microplastics have now been detected both in indoor and outdoor air, in tap and bottled water. It's estimated that we could inhale or ingest 5 grams per week of plastic. We have no idea what the health impacts of that exposure are, but microplastics have been detected in lung tissue, in blood, and in placenta. And there are a whole host of potential health effects that we're currently researching and trying to get ahead of. But again, something that can come off, and if anyone has ever played on artificial turf, you know that you get this really fine particulate dust all over you when you come home. So I do want to shift gears away from those chemical exposures to think about heat effects. And again, putting down an artificial turf field is similar to replacing that tree canopy that you currently have that has a cooling impact with asphalt or with, black slate tile roof. So they do, I saw someone had put something in the chat about this. Surface temperatures with any type of artificial turf, it doesn't matter what the infill is or what the color of the infill is, can get up to 200 degrees, which is much hotter than the grass, and also hotter than the air at head height above grass. So again, I told you that children have a hard time regulating their body temperature. So this puts them at really high risk of illness from heat exposure. This image is showing a New York City satellite image where you can see that the turf field, so the hottest areas are in dark red on that infrared image, and the turf field and a black asphalt roof reached very similar temperatures on a hot summer day. And this is data that we collected in New York City on an artificial turf playground and a chrome rubber turf field, comparing the temperatures that they reached on a day that was between 80 and 90 degrees in New York City. So not too hot. And of course, we're seeing more of those hot days with the increase in climate change. And so you can see that the rubber artificial turf surface is up here in blue and here for the playground, reaching again much higher temperatures up to something like 160 degrees on a kind of mildly warm for what we experience now summer day. So the potential to create heat islands, particularly if we're talking about a 4-acre surface where you're reducing the tree canopy, is very high with these surfaces. Again, health effects. So you can experience a 1st-degree burn or 2nd-degree burn at 131 degrees Fahrenheit. And I showed you previously that even on a children's playground, those temperatures are reaching upwards of 150 degrees. So definitely hot enough to cause burns, hot enough to not be able to play. So if these, one of the things that always bothers me is when artificial turf surfaces are used as the green space. I wouldn't really call it a green space, but used as the recreational space that a neighborhood has, but they are too hot to even be utilized during the summertime. And then I would just say again that the health effects of climate change represent sort of indirect health effects that can be experienced from the use of artificial turf surfaces. Some of you all mentioned flooding. And so these are really non-porous surfaces. And so that when you have high rains, not only do they increase flooding, they can take that infill or chrome rubber or microplastics and the chemicals with it and wash right off into waterways and water supplies. And I think Dr. Bennett mentioned that not only do they create heat islands, but they really have this cradle to grave impact on greenhouse gas emissions. And you're probably familiar with all of the myriad health effects of climate change that sometimes we don't even think about, like missed work and school and increased mental health problems, as well as increases in insect-borne diseases. And so that's essentially what I wanted to share. And I just wanted to direct you to a couple of additional resources that we have. And I can try to put links in the chat for these as well. This is a partnership for healthy playing surfaces that we have at Mount Sinai with the Toxic Use Reduction Institute and other local community organizations that have been fighting turf in their communities. And you can scan this QR code to link to some of our educational materials, including more information on health risks of artificial turf, but also climate change and air pollution and so on. And we do have some social media through Mount Sinai that you can access as well to keep up to date on things that we're doing. So thank you, and I will end there. I can.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Evans. I mean, a wealth of information between you and Dr. Bennett. I hope for the group here tonight that this has been very useful. I know for me, with the fight that I'm having over at Morton Street, it absolutely is. I just can't believe that we're talking about destruction of 4 acres right by people's homes to put in something in perpetuity that will be poisoning us. And like I said before, creating a cancer alley and down the road a Superfund site. So the fact that we're still having to have these conversations is just mind-boggling. And I know that the group here tonight, we want to talk about next steps. Like we really want to, and Frank, if you can pull up the slides, please, because this leads us into our outcomes and our goals, because we're wanting to advocate for hopefully a ban on PFAS, because we see that it's heading in that direction. We have all the science is there to support a full ban on this toxic material. And so we're hoping that from tonight's meeting, we can kind of strategize with one another on how do we get there and get those next steps. So our summit goals, coalition building, which is going to be so important for us to advance any of these goals that we want to put forward, is for us to work together collectively. We're all dealing with these same issues as we heard tonight, and I'm sorry we had to go so fast, but there were just so many sites to present, and there are even more that we didn't even get to. So with that being said, we know we have a huge problem. And in the city of Boston, we have really, in EJ communities, a huge problem with the reduction of tree canopy, the installation of turf. So we need to work together. We want to have a citywide strong tree protection ordinance. Some options are also a full tree removal moratorium, a ban, like I said, on artificial turf, and just having, these conversations to understand what our next action steps are going to look like to protect the green spaces that we have left. We want to, the conservation of endangered land and move the Boston Urban Forest Plan forward. So hopefully together, that is something that we will be able to do. And I think at this point in the presentation, we can kind of open it up for Q&A so we can have a dialogue and maybe flesh out our next steps, or if people have questions, we can start with those.
Well, I guess I'll start. Hi, everybody. Mimi Turchnetz from Hyde Park. I guess the real question to me, just in terms of the exact next step, because there are these very specific agenda items like the ordinance that includes some kind of protection of currently unprotected canopy, and then also all the different neighborhood struggles. I guess to me, it feels like we should do, because we're not going to have time to do it tonight, to do action planning should be the next kind of the next step. So come together with some strategies on how we work together, how we identify these key issues, but then also know that we're still moving forward with our different strategies. So, but I think we do need, one next key action agenda as opposed to educational agenda for us to move forward kind of right now immediately.
Thank you for that, Mimi. Do we have any, Mayim, are there any questions in the chat that we need to, and I'm trying to see. I'm sorry, but on my screen, I can't see people's hands who are raised.
Yeah, there are hands raised, daughter.
If you can call them out, I don't know why I'm not seeing them.
Okay, well, I see Dr. Martin is on, so Dr. Martin.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thank you, Alana, for your leadership and work to convene all different parts of the city who are trying to work through fighting for preservation of land as well as prevention of harm in communities. And so your question about next steps, I think this was an important part of the next steps, or important part of setting us up for next steps. All of us are on the same page about what our respective struggles are, all of us on the same page about understanding what the real dangers of these chemicals and other components that have been discussed this evening. And so for our next step, I am happy to support you and the larger group in any ways I can as you look towards collective action planning. I think it's important that things not be, that there's a continuous collaboration that brings these different realities together so that we can see the commonalities and then be able to push back and have a larger voice in the city to move this work forward. I want to say, and then the last thing I'll say is in that spirit, there's a lot of great researchers, in addition to the ones that we have here around environmental justice communities and things like that in the city that I think would be willing to support any of these efforts to make sure that we have strong policy foundation to be able the city to play the role we're supposed to play in providing accountability necessary for government.
Next up, Ann McHugh, and then Patricia Alvarez.
Hi, everybody. Thanks to everyone for amazing presentations and Alana for all the work that you and the organizing committee did. So Ann McHugh, I live in Jamaica Plain. I participate in the statewide Trees as a Public Good network and the Speak for the Trees Buff network. So I would like to, I guess, second what Atia said, and to suggest that there needs to be further conversations of whatever number of folks want to be part of it, to think through both the strategies within the city. I mean, there's the mayoral and cabinet of the environment and the parks department, and then there's also the city council. And I was suggesting in the chat that I think that's a potential way to go. So I think kind of lining up the ducks about what are the asks and beginning to have informal conversations. And I really think engaging with Kendra Lara, who's the District 6 City Councilor, it's JP in West Roxbury, and she is the chair of the Environment Plus Committee, would be an early way to go. And I don't know whether folks on some of the different neighborhood-based parcel issues have worked with her at all or not. Thank you.
All right, Patricia, and then Glenn Ears, and then it's a person on the phone.
I think this is so exciting to finally be seeing how many organizations there are in the city that are fighting for the same thing when we've been sort of fighting this battle. I think what we need is to come to an agreement on our top priority asks for the city. And, whether it be, prohibition of using any kind of artificial turfs, whether it be prohibition of clear cutting of any woodlands going forward, the difference between a prohibition and a moratorium. I'm not sure we should talk about that, but I think we need a united front on one or two key issues. And then from my experience working with the city council, starting from the mayor's office, chief of environment, city councilors, they need education. They do not understand what we are talking about. They say they do, but from my experience, they really don't. So I think we come up with our common asks or demands or whatever you want to call them. We start in a friendly way, trying to educate our elected officials, and then we advance our strategy if it has to get tougher, so be it. But we come up with a united strategy that over time, evolves. But I think step one is saying, okay, these are the two things we're going to fight for, whatever we decide those two things are. And then as a united front, move forward. Otherwise, we'll get picked off one by one. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Glenn?
Hi, thanks. I don't know how many folks know me. I do the Enviro show. It's out in Western Mass, but I've had a number of the people who are here tonight as guests on that show, radio show. And one of the things that I'm very interested in, a coalition of groups like this, is supporting the municipal reforestation legislation that Senator Cream has been kind of cheerleading for, introduced. And there's an opportunity to have some additional language inserted into that before it gets reintroduced. And it's something that I think this sort of group should be focused on the problem with it in the last session or in this current session, which is ending, was the funding mechanism. And so we need to find a new funding mechanism to create these municipal tree reforestation entities in every town. This isn't just a problem in Boston, it's a problem in most of the areas of the state. And we do need a legislative solution to a lot of these problems. So I would advocate for us paying close attention to that municipal reforestation proposed legislation and working with our legislators to give power to the people, because right now we are fighting against City Hall essentially, and we should be wielding the political power in this situation. I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but I think we need to have that in our toolkit. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. There is someone on the phone that's last number is 445.
Hi, yes. My name's Craig Martin. I'm in Hyde Park. Thank you for hosting this meeting tonight. I'm just seeing kind of new to this a little bit, but I'm seeing a complication here between public and private fights. I'm envisioning that that city council that was mentioned earlier, that she might be right away agreeable to saying yes, the city hall is not going to be allow any artificial turf on city properties anymore. But it sounds to me tonight like we're more engaged in or likely to be fighting private development. Whether the tree canopy, which I'm familiar with certainly, and I understand this artificial turf tonight. It sounds like a private developer, and I think we're going to need much more legal consultation. I'm thinking like some organization like the Conservation Law Foundation, which I know is fighting all the towns down the Cape to clean up their estuaries and opposing regulations and what have you, both private and public regulations. Because I think we want to make sure that we differentiate the fight here between between City Hall agreeing on the city lands, and how do we get to impose regulations on the private lands. So I'm rambling now, but I'm seeing some complications here and hoping that we can overcome them.
You're not rambling, Craig. We understand you.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we totally agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig.
Kyla?
Thank you. I just wanted to note that we all know we have a new governor coming in and theoretically a new commissioner of DEP. And I think this might be an opportunity to think a little bit more broadly, as Glenn suggested. Hi, Glenn. To do something statewide. I have talked to certain people within DEP about looking at a statewide ban on artificial turf. There is some legislation in some other states. Some groups are trying to do that. But I think you do have a very different opportunity when you have a new governor coming in and new people, because they can kind of, whether it's right or not, blame the previous administrations, particularly when you've got a change from a Republican to a Democrat, and say, oh, they did it wrong. We're going to do it right. We're going to fight for you. You should take advantage of that and try to think bigger about moratoriums on tree cutting, given climate change, moratoriums on artificial turf. Let's try to do it at a state level. I mean, obviously fight at the city level and the local level, but I think there's an opportunity here to do something bigger.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. Joanna, and that's the last hand, Alana, that's the last hand that's up.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to say, I think the state idea is a good idea because a lot of the land in the city is owned by the state. And I really am a big proponent of pushing this moratorium. I know the word freaks people out and it seems too big to be taken seriously, but it can be refined. And when I see all these pictures of acres and acres of urban forest that are in jeopardy right now, and I look back into how many iterations of this ordinance have been sort of put out and then taken back over the last 10 years, we really cannot afford to wait. And this is a public health crisis. So I think a moratorium on the removal, at the very least, of trees that are owned by the city, and that includes trees on the BHA properties. I mean, we could make it statewide, we could have several, but a moratorium will preserve and protect what we have today, because there is no guarantee that we will get back what we lose if these trees go down. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I drive around and I see these spindling saplings that are broken a year after being planted, my concern is that that just is a cycle of business for the tree planters. What do they care? Tree dies, they sell a new one. You know, there's all this money being poured into the city right now for tree plantings. Preservation has got to be the top objective. We need the trees we have.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Parker, you had your hand up before and lowered it. Do you still have a comment to make?
Oh, thank you very much. I actually put my comment into chat. I was just strongly agreeing with what Patricia said. If we can figure out our areas of agreement and all stick together and speak with one voice, no one will be able to stop us. So that's the key. It is instinct. It's in the genes of these organizations to try to find ways to, when I say divide us, we just cannot let that happen. As long as we're together, we're going to win. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Parker. And I think is it Mayim or Mayim?
It's Mayim, and I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing a couple things to bring up. First, just a quick question from Kathy Horn, who wants to know if the kind of rubberized surfaces that we see on playgrounds are a similar problem to the artificial turf.
Yes.
Yeah, and I can just add to that. I showed some data around the very high temperatures that are experienced there. The other added complication is that those rubberized surfaces are a mixture of different products. Sometimes they're the recycled tire crumb below another plastic or virgin rubber surface. And then, there are solvents and glues that help everything stick together that we don't necessarily know all of the ingredients for, but that may off gas or be released as they heat up. And if you've ever seen those, they can break up and then the kids are exposed to chunks and particles. So yeah, they have similar problems, and then also potentially a host of additional problems. And the youngest children are on them. So yes.
Okay, thank you. And then a larger question that was brought up by Lalisa, asking Mimi and the other legal people here, where can we take collective legal action? And then Mimi commented that shared legal strategy could be a committee, and that's probably a committee we need to form and where we need to go in planning actions. So I wanted to capture those, and any comments on those would be welcome now.
I would just like to add that, yes, Mr. Elisa, I totally, and Mimi, I totally agree. We've been talking about it for a while, that legal action needs to take place on a lot of these sites. So I'm hoping that from this meeting, we can sit down and start having these conversations as to strategize. Maybe it is with Conservation Law Foundation or elsewhere, whether it's with the Chapter 214-7A, but taking those next steps, because I can just speak for myself with Morton Street. For years, we've been having these conversations, and the process doesn't seem to work because the developer, even up until last month, is in a meeting saying that he's going to make sure that the field is installed. So, these are the conversations, the way that it's going, where developers feel like they control the narratives and the conversations. And I feel like at some point, legal options are the only options that we have left. So that is a great idea.
There's a question from Erica Holm.
This question is more just kind of in the spirit of what Parker was saying of doing things united, and just making sure, this may have been said in the chat, I'm sorry, I'm not following it 100%, but I'm Mass Audubon's urban ecologist, so statewide urban ecology and urban forestry is kind of like something I take a really special interest in. And I just wanted to make sure that this group is aware of the Boston Green New Deal Coalition and their nature-based strategies working group. There was a meeting earlier this evening, and their third goal that we're kind of putting together is to do with a stronger tree ordinance and different legal actions. And there were some members of CLF on that call. So just maybe combining these things in some way. And great meeting. Thank you so much to everyone for raising these issues.
Thank you, Erica. Would you be able to put the meeting information in the chat so that if we want to attend, we're able to?
Definitely, yeah. And the organizer for the issue area group is Dira from Charles River Watershed Association. Dira is incredible. So I will make sure to put a couple links in the chat.
Thank you so much. Pat, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one other thing, and that is the difference between woodlands that are on public land versus private land. I think there's a lot of woodland in Boston that's on private land, which is very scary because that's harder to get our hands on. And I know they don't like, the city does not like to do takings or even friendly takings, but there's ARPA money, there's federal money, there's state money, there's city money. The city, in my opinion, of Boston, the city of Boston should be moving to use, and Mass Audubon is, you know, working with us on Crane Ledge Woods to try to find private sources of money. The city needs to commit to helping raise the funds, or at least accepting funds to do private takings, to purchase this land from private owners. Any remaining woodland in the city should be taken and preserved. And I know that sounds like very high in the sky, but the mayor stood there with the Prince and Princess of Wales and said, we're going to be the greenest city in the United States. Well, okay, then let her show us how she's going to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. Mimi?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask whether or not, I know that we had talked, you and I, Alana, had talked about kind of the next step meeting. And I wondered if we had a date and if Morton Street will host it. And can we just agree on a date now? Because my question about how do we respond collectively about this meeting? I mean, I don't think that we have had the time to put together a collective response. And so instead of sending out a press release or Twittering or whatever to say, this group met, stay tuned. And I don't know if we want to put together a small group of people who would want to create some little press hit, or if we want to wait. But it seems to me that given that we're only supposed to be going until 8 o'clock, we should probably come back together again with the goal of what is our collective response as we're moving forward, kind of building this new collaborative.
Absolutely. So we did have the planning group, we did have conversations about next steps in a meeting. We bounced around some dates, but we didn't land on one yet. I did put my email in the chat. So savemortonstreettrees@gmail.com. People can email me there if they are interested for when we will have a follow-up meeting. I just can't commit to a date right now. We have the holidays coming up, and there was a lot of work from all of the planning committee involved with getting this summit together. So, you know, I just don't want to commit to a date right now, but I will say that please send an email. Maybe you have my other email as well, and we can connect. For others who are on the call, savemortonstreettrees@gmail.com. I put it in the chat. I'll put it in again. You can email me there and we'll start to have the conversations about dates and next steps. Okay.
I would just ask that we try to aim for sooner rather than later, so we can keep up a momentum.
Absolutely.
For a next meeting date.
Absolutely. Oh, and to your point, Mimi, I don't know who's going to host it. It'll probably be a collaborative effort of, the planning committee who worked to put on this summit. So we will definitely keep you posted. Any other, I see Nancy and then Parker.
Hi, I would just add, perhaps it might be helpful for many of the people asking similar questions about goals to just remind them their resources are in the slide deck. We didn't show all those, but there's some very good information and a little more on our goals. So we switched. We didn't show those last few slides. You might want to do that, just a quick bounce of that, which might answer some of these questions about what we had already thought about in terms of next steps.
Thank you for that reminder, Nancy. Yes. Please take a look at the PowerPoint. A lot of great resources in there. Parker?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Alana, for your incredible leadership. This has been a fantastic meeting. It would absolutely not have happened if you had not led it to happen. So thank you so much. You are amazing.
Parker, thank you so much. But I would say it was the group, our planning committee, that they're all on tonight. I mean, all hands were on deck. It was a group effort. Amazing team, amazing team. And I look so forward to working with them in the future on all of these issues. But thank you, Parker. I really appreciate it. And I just hope that this is a lot of great information for everyone who is here tonight to understand, like, we're all with you in these fights. You are fighting your fights. We have these fights here. Let's get together and fight these fights as one. So, any other questions? And I thank you all so, Mayim?
There's a question in the chat. Just wanting to be assured that all attendees tonight will be kept informed as this coalition comes together.
So yes, we were trying to think of the best way to do that. That's why I put the Save the Morton Street Trees at gmail.com to email me. And for those of you who have my other email, please feel free to reach out and I'll start compiling a list of those who want to be involved. And when the committee meets, the planning group meets again, we'll reach out and then expand it to those who also want to work with us to take these next action steps. So it's definitely going to happen. It's definitely going to happen. We just have to reset a little bit, but it won't be too long into the new year and we'll be back at it again.
Thank you again, Alana.
Thank you guys. It was awesome.
Thank you,
Unbelievable.
Alana.
Thanks to all
Thanks,
of you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
everyone.
Showed up.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Holidays.
Congratulations, Alana.
Bye. Thank you.
Woo, yes.